Let me ask you a question, and don't answer it out loud. What if the reason you're not making the money you want isn't because you're bad at marketing, isn't because you need a better funnel, and isn't because the algorithm is against you? What if it's because you've been trying to sell when what people are actually waiting for is someone to lead them? Right now, millions of smart, talented people are sitting on life-changing knowledge, and nobody's listening. Not because the knowledge isn't valuable, but because it's being delivered without belief, without identity, without a reason for people to rally around it. People don't pay for information anymore. They pay for certainty. They pay for clarity. Ha. They pay for someone who can look at the chaos and say, this way, that's how movements start. Not with products, not with ads, but with a message that hits someone so deeply they think, oh, finally, someone gets it. And here's the underground truth most experts never learn: you don't need more followers to be free. You need the right people to believe in you. Because when belief is present, selling feels natural. When belief is missing, nothing converts. This isn't about hype or manipulation. This is about service at scale. It's about turning your experience into a message, your message into a movement, and your movement into a business that creates income without begging for attention every day. Financial freedom doesn't come from chasing trends. It comes from standing for something long enough that people gather around it. And once you understand how belief, story, authority, and value fit together, you stop trying to market and you start building something people don't want to leave. That's what this is about. Not getting louder, getting clearer, not selling harder, leading better. Because when you lead correctly, money follows, always. Let me start by telling you a story. Because every movement, every message that changes lives, every business that actually matters always starts with a story. There was a time when experts didn't struggle to be heard. If you had knowledge, people came to you. If you had wisdom, it spread. But today the world is louder than it has ever been. Algorithms decide who gets seen. Platforms decide who gets paid. And most people with the most valuable experience are invisible, not because they're not good enough, but because they were never taught how to lead. Here's the hard truth most experts don't want to face. People don't pay for information. Information is free. You can Google almost anything. YouTube can teach you almost everything. AI can explain the rest. People pay for belief. They pay for certainty. They pay for clarity. They pay for someone who stands up and says, I've been where you are. I know the path, and I'll walk you through it. That's not manipulation. That's leadership. And leadership starts the moment you stop asking, how do I sell this? And start asking, who am I here to serve? Most people with incredible knowledge never make an impact because they stay stuck in technician mode. They perfect their craft. They gather credentials. They polish resumes. They wait to feel ready. But movements aren't built by the most qualified person in the room. They're built by the person who is willing to speak, the one who is willing to say, this is what I believe, this is what I stand for, and this is the future I see. Here's something I've learned after watching thousands of entrepreneurs rise and fall. The market doesn't reward the best idea. It rewards the clearest message, and clarity comes from conviction. You don't need to know everything. You need to know what you believe deeply enough to teach it repeatedly. That's the first shift. You are not here to be an expert who hides behind slides and certifications. You are here to be a guide, a leader, a messenger. People don't follow perfection. They follow progress. They follow someone who admits the struggle, shares the scars, and still stands confident in the solution. This is where financial freedom actually begins. Not with funnels, not with ads, not with tactics, but with identity. The moment you decide, I am responsible for the transformation of the people I serve, when you take responsibility, something changes. You stop chasing trends, you stop copying competitors, you stop watering down your message to avoid criticism. Because you realize something powerful. Confusion costs people money, time, and years of their lives. And clarity is service. Selling the right message to the right people is not greed, it's generosity. If you truly believe your knowledge can help someone escape pain, avoid mistakes, or move faster, then hiding it is selfish. That's the mindset shift most people never make. They think money corrupts the message. In reality, money amplifies it. Money is not the reward for manipulation. It's the reward for value clearly communicated and consistently delivered. Financial freedom is simply the byproduct of serving a mass of people deeply, honestly, and repeatedly. But you can't do that if you don't stand for something. Movements don't form around features, they form around beliefs. People don't buy courses, they buy identity shifts. They're not asking, oh, what will this teach me? They're asking, who will I become? And if you can't answer that clearly, no funnel will save you. This is why storytelling matters more than selling. Stories create emotional certainty. Stories help people see themselves in a future they haven't reached yet. Stories bypass logic and speak directly to the part of the brain that makes decisions. No, you don't need a dramatic life story. You don't need to be famous. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be honest about the journey, where you were, what didn't work, what finally clicked, and why you believe it will work for them too. That's how trust is built, and trust is the real currency. When trust is present, price resistance disappears. When trust is absent, nothing converts. This is why the underground movements always beat the mainstream, because they're not trying to please everyone. They're trying to serve their people, the ones who feel misunderstood, the ones who feel stuck, the ones who are searching for a framework, a path, a leader. Here's a line I live by, and it's changed everything for me. You don't need millions of followers. You need a small group of people who believe in you deeply. That's how freedom is built. Not by going viral, but by going meaningful. In the next part, we'll talk about belief itself, how beliefs are formed, why logic alone never convinces anyone, and how the strongest movements in history didn't start with proof. They started with conviction. Because once you understand belief, you stop trying to convince people, and you start calling them forward. At some point, every movement crosses an invisible line. It stops being about information and starts being about identity. This is where most people freeze because they think belief is something you argue into people. They think if they just explain better, add more proof, show more testimonials, more logic, more data, people will finally say yes. But belief doesn't work like that. Belief is not downloaded, it's adopted. People don't change because they're convinced. They change because they feel understood. Because someone finally articulated the frustration they couldn't put into words. Because a new identity feels safer than the one they're living with now. That's why the strongest movements in history didn't begin with evidence. They began with a problem people already felt in their bones. Think about it. Nobody needed to be convinced they were frustrated, overwhelmed, or stuck. They needed language for it. They needed permission to admit it. And they needed someone to say, you're not broken. The system you're in that's leadership. When you speak to the pain someone is already living with, you don't have to sell. You're already aligned. This is where your message stops being about what you do and starts being about what you believe. Beliefs create filters. They attract the right people and repel the wrong ones. The people who feel that truth lean in. The people who don't were never yours anyway. Here's something most experts underestimate. People want to belong to something bigger than themselves. They want a shared enemy, a shared frustration, a shared future. The enemy isn't always a person. Often it's confusion, complexity, broken systems, old rules that no longer work. When you define the enemy clearly, you give people relief. They finally know what they're fighting against. And when you paint a compelling future, you give them hope. They know what they're moving toward. That's the belief bridge. But here's the key. Belief starts with you. If you hedge your words, your audience hedges their commitment. If you speak timidly, they doubt quietly. If you don't fully own your message, they won't either. Conviction is contagious. You don't need to shout. You need to stand firm. This is why financial freedom is tied to belief, not tactics. People who struggle financially often struggle with belief first. Belief in their value, belief in their message, belief that they are allowed to charge for transformation. They say things like, who am I to teach this? Or I don't want to seem salesy. But here's the reframe. Selling is simply transferring belief. If you believe your message can help someone and you fail to communicate it clearly, you're not being humble. You're being irresponsible. Money doesn't follow effort, it follows certainty. People pay for confidence because confidence reduces risk. They're not buying your course or coaching, they're buying a shortcut around doubt. That's not hype. That's not hype. That's human psychology. This is also why belief must be repeated over and over. In different stories, in different moments, across different mediums, people don't need new ideas. They need to hear the same truth enough times for it to replace the old one. Repetition isn't annoying. Inconsistency is. This is where most movements die. Not because the message is wrong, but because the messenger gets bored before the audience catches up. Leadership requires patience. You don't get paid once for your belief. You get paid every time someone crosses the bridge you've been standing on faithfully. And when that happens consistently, something powerful occurs. Your message begins to scale without you pushing it. People start sharing it, teaching it, defending it. That's when you know you've crossed from business into movement. In the next part, we'll talk about authority. Not fake authority, not borrowed credibility, but the kind that's earned by responsibility, consistency, and service. Because belief gets attention. Authority keeps it. Authority is misunderstood. Most people think authority comes from credentials, titles, followers, or being the best. So they wait. They wait until they feel qualified. They wait until someone gives them permission. They wait until the fear goes away. And while they're waiting, someone less prepared but more decisive steps up and leads their people. Authority is not claimed. It's assumed through responsibility. The moment you take responsibility for an outcome in someone else's life, you step into authority whether you feel ready or not. That's the underground truth. People don't follow experts because they're perfect. They follow them because they're consistent, because they show up, because they say, "I'll go first." Authority is built when you make promises and keep them. When you simplify complexity, when you stand between confusion and clarity and say, "Follow me, I've mapped this road." And here's the part most people miss. Most people miss. Authority doesn't mean knowing everything. It means knowing the next step better than the person you're helping. If you're one chapter ahead, you can lead. This is why movements scale faster than businesses. Businesses sell transactions. Movements sell trust. And trust compounds. When people trust you, they stop shopping. They stop comparing. They stop hesitating. Trust removes friction. This is also why financial freedom is tied directly to authority. People with authority don't compete on price. They don't chase clients. They don't beg for attention. They attract. Because authority reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is what people are actually paying to escape. Think about it. When someone hands you money, they're saying, "I trust you to reduce my risk." Risk of failure, risk of wasting time, risk of staying stuck. That's not manipulation. That's service. But authority requires something uncomfortable. Visibility with accountability. You don't get to hide once people are watching. You don't get to disappear when things get hard. You don't get to contradict yourself every week without losing trust. Authority is built in public under pressure. This is where most people sabotage themselves. They want the benefits of leadership without the burden of consistency. They change messages too often. They chase shiny objects. They pivot every time engagement dips. But movements aren't built by novelty. They're built by reliability. People don't ask, "Is this new?" They ask, "Is this stable?" Stability creates safety. Safety creates loyalty. This is also why ethical persuasion matters. Real authority doesn't coerce. It doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't prey on fear. It invites. It says, "Here's the truth as I see it. Here's the path I've walked. Take it if it resonates." That kind of authority lasts. And here's a financial principle most people never hear. Money flows toward those who take long-term responsibility. Short-term thinkers chase quick cash. Long-term leaders build ecosystems. They don't just sell products. They build frameworks, languages. Shared beliefs. They create customers who stay, not buyers who bounce. This is how you escape the feast or famine cycle. This is how income becomes predictable. This is how freedom becomes sustainable, not by hacking attention, but by earning trust over time. Authority also means saying no. No to misaligned opportunities. No to audiences that drain you. No to money that compromises your values, because every yes costs you authority somewhere else. When people see you choose alignment over profit, trust skyrockets. And ironically, so does profit. Because people want to follow someone who isn't desperate. Authority is calm. It doesn't rush. It doesn't chase. It doesn't need to convince. It stands. And when you stand long enough, people gather. In the next part, we'll talk about the engine that carries authority at scale, story at scale. Not storytelling as entertainment, but story as a belief delivery system that turns strangers into followers and followers into advocates. Because facts inform, but stories transform. Story, not story as fluff, not story as entertainment, story as infrastructure. Because if belief is the spark and authority is the foundation, story is the engine that carries your message from one heart to another without you being in the room. Here's the mistake most people make. They think storytelling is about being interesting, about being dramatic, about having a crazy life. It's not. Storytelling is about meaning making. Humans don't remember facts. We remember patterns. We remember cause and effect. We remember struggle and resolution. That's how the brain is wired. Long before spreadsheets and statistics, stories were how we survived. And that wiring never went away. Every time someone hears your message, their brain is asking one question: where do I fit in this? If they can't see themselves in the story, they won't move, no matter how logical your offer is. This is why data convinces the mind, but story moves the body. People don't take action because something makes sense. They take action because it feels safe to believe, and story creates safety. The most powerful stories aren't about how amazing you are. They're about how familiar the struggle feels, how human the failure was, how clear the turning point became. You don't need to be the hero. You need to be the guide. The hero is always the audience. Your job is to show them the map. Here's where ethical persuasion lives. You don't exaggerate outcomes. You don't promise perfection. You don't remove struggle from the story. You normalize it. You say, this part is hard. This part takes time. This part tests your patience. And instead of pushing people away, that honesty pulls them closer. Because trust isn't built by pretending something is easy. Trust is built by telling the truth about what it costs. This is why real movements outlast algorithms. Platforms change, tactics fade, attention shifts, but story sticks. A strong story creates language. Language creates community. Community creates momentum. And momentum is where financial freedom becomes real. Not because you're constantly hustling, but because people carry the message for you. They repeat your words. They teach your framework. They defend your belief. That's leverage. This is also why your story must include a villain. Not a person, but a problem. An outdated belief, a broken system. A lie people have been living under. When you name the villain clearly, people feel relief. Their frustration finally has a shape. And when you show them a new path, they feel hope, not the fragile kind, but the grounded kind that says, this makes sense. Money flows toward clarity. Confusion repels commitment. That's a financial law, not a marketing trick. This is how story connects directly to freedom. When your message is clear, your selling becomes simple. When your selling is simple, your business becomes stable. When your business is stable, your life gets margin. Margin in time, margin in money, margin in energy. That's real wealth. And here's the secret most people overlook. Your story evolves as your audience evolves. You don't tell the same story forever because you get bored. You tell it deeper because they grow. The surface story attracts. The deeper story retains. The shared story multiplies. This is how strangers become followers and followers become advocates. Not through pressure, through resonance. And resonance only happens when your story is aligned with your values. If your story is fake, it exhausts you. If it's true, it energizes you. That's how you know you're on the right path. In the next part, we'll talk about money directly, not as a taboo, not as a shortcut, but as a responsibility. How to build offers that serve, pricing that respects transformation, and income that doesn't cost you your integrity. Because the goal isn't just to build a movement. The goal is to build one you're proud to sustain. Let's talk about money, because for a lot of people, this is where everything gets tangled. They love the idea of impact. They love the idea of helping people. They love the idea of freedom. But the moment money enters the conversation, something tightens in their chest. They start whispering instead of speaking clearly. They apologize for their prices. They undercharge. They overdeliver. They burn out. And then they quietly resent the very people they wanted to serve. That's not noble. That's unsustainable. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Money is not the reward for selling. Money is the fuel for service at scale. If you remove money from the equation, your impact stays small. If you treat money with shame, your message stays fragile. If you avoid charging properly, you cap how many people you can help, including yourself. Financial freedom is not about getting rich quick. It's about building a system that allows you to keep showing up without desperation. Desperation is what ruins integrity. People can feel it. They sense when you need the sale. They sense when your offer exists to pay your bills instead of solve their problems. And trust erodes fast when money becomes survival instead of structure. This is why offers matter so much. An offer is not a product. It's a promise of transformation. Oh. And pricing is not about what's fair. It's about what creates commitment. Free information creates interest. Paid commitment creates change. People don't value what costs them nothing, not because they're bad, but because humans take seriously what requires sacrifice. This is an emotional truth, not a moral one. When someone pays, they're not just buying access, they're buying responsibility for their own outcome. They're saying, I'm in, I'm willing to do the work. That's powerful, and it's why ethical pricing is an act of respect, not greed. You're respecting their ability to choose. You're respecting the transformation. And you're respecting yourself enough to sustain the work. This is one of the core financial principles behind real freedom. Build income that's aligned with value, not volume. You don't need millions of customers. You need a clear promise, the right people, and a delivery that actually works. When your offer is aligned, selling stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like invitation. You're not convincing. You're enrolling, and when enrollment replaces persuasion, stress disappears. This is also where long-term thinking separates leaders from hustlers. Hustlers chase cash flow. Leaders build lifetime value. They ask different questions. Not how much can I make today, but who do I want to serve for the next 10 years? That question changes how you build everything. Your content, your pricing, your systems, your boundaries. You stop burning bridges for quick wins. You stop making promises you can't keep. You stop trading trust for attention, because trust compounds faster than money ever will. Here's a principle I've lived by. If your business can't survive without you grinding every day, you don't own a business. You own a job with better marketing. Freedom comes from leverage. Leverage through systems, leverage through community, leverage through repeatable transformation. And the only way leverage works ethically is when value is real. This is why the underground movements always outlast the flashy launches, because they're built on depth, not noise. People stay because the work actually helps them. They pay again because the belief deepens. They refer others because their identity changes. That's not luck. That's alignment. Money flows naturally in aligned systems. It doesn't need force. It doesn't need tricks. It doesn't need guilt. It needs clarity, commitment, and consistency. In the final part, we'll pull everything together. Belief, authority, story, money, and talk about what it really means to build a movement that survives trends, algorithms, and even you. Because the highest level of freedom isn't just financial. It's knowing what you built can stand without you pushing it every day. At some point, you stop asking how to grow faster and start asking how to build something that lasts, because scale without stability is just collapse delay. This is where movements separate themselves from marketing campaigns. Campaigns spike and vanish. Movements endure because they're built on identity, values, and shared belief. A real movement doesn't depend on your energy every day. It doesn't require you to shout louder or hustle harder. It functions because people inside it know who they are, what they believe, and how to move forward, even when you're not in the room. That's legacy. Legacy is not about being remembered. It's about being replicated. When your message becomes language others use, when your framework becomes thinking patterns others adopt, when your values become standards others uphold, you've crossed into something bigger than business. This is also where true freedom lives. Financial freedom is not the absence of work. It's the presence of choice. Choice in how you spend your time. Choice in who you serve. Choice in what you say no to. And choice only exists when your system works without constant force. That requires patience. Movements are slow at the beginning. Painfully slow. You speak and it feels like no one is listening. You repeat yourself. You doubt. You wonder if it's worth it. It is. Because while attention is noisy, belief is quiet. And belief grows underground before it ever shows above the surface. Most people quit before the roots take hold. But if you stay consistent, if you keep showing up with the same message, the same values, the same integrity, something shifts. People stop asking, "Who are you?" They start saying, "I've been waiting for this." That's when momentum becomes inevitable. This is also when leadership deepens. Because now it's not about you anymore. It's about protecting the movement from dilution. You guard the message. You uphold the standard. You choose depth over reach. And yes, that means turning down opportunities that don't align. That means letting go of money that feels wrong. That means staying grounded when ego tries to pull you off center. But this is the price of something that lasts. Here's the final principle I want to leave you with, because it ties everything together. Belief, authority, story, money, freedom. You don't build a movement to get paid. You get paid because you built a movement. Money follows meaning, always. When people feel seen, they stay. When they feel guided, they commit. When they feel transformed, they tell others. That's the engine that never burns out. And when it's built right, you don't wake up wondering how to sell today. You wake up asking how to serve better. That's the shift. That's the underground playbook. Not tricks, not hacks, not hypes, not hype, but clarity, courage, and consistency. You stand for something. You speak it clearly. You invite others to walk the path with you, and over time, not overnight, freedom shows up not just in your bank account, but in your calendar, in your energy, in your sense of purpose. That's what it means to lead. That's what it means to build something that matters. And once you experience that, you'll never want to go back to playing small again.